Okay. So there's a pattern, there's a principle in the human condition and in nature that basically states that patterns persist, right? This is what all habits are based on. And so this gentleman by the name of Dr. Stephen Bierman puts it beautifully, like he uses this as an example. Um, Try not to say what I don't say. Oh, say, can you, by the dawn's early. Now, notice you want to complete that pattern, right? If you don't say it, your body wants to say. If you're ever talking to someone who's stuttering, right? And they say, I want to get a drink of water, you want to finish it. So patterns persist. Fair enough? Yeah. So patterns persist. And our body and brain are a bunch of patterns. These patterns are going to keep persisting. And what happens with people when they don't change, when we don't change, is that we have another pattern that is connected to the existing pattern. For example, I have a pattern called I have an emotion, a craving, ice cream, I eat the ice cream, drink, have that alcohol. And now I have another pattern called I beat myself up, I hate myself, I ruminate, I perseverate, I have some adaptive behavior, and then that might continue into another pattern of coping, right? And so I have a pattern, don't like it, and then instead of changing the pattern, I react to the pattern, which continues the pattern. So, what is a pattern? Everything that's automated. What's automated? 95% of our thoughts and emotions and behaviors as a result. So, I have patterns in my brain called synapses firing, right? This connectivity that fires together. There are thoughts, there are patterns, and they're just electrical activity, right? And neuropeptides, right? Neurotransmitters, right? So that's all that's happening. Now, I say that's my experience, so that becomes images that I call my future, that I might call my past, that I might call images, whatever it is. These are just synapses firing, and they're patterns that make me, Joe, right? A future, a past, a present, what's important, what's not important, my hopes, my dreams, but they're just patterns. And these patterns work symbiotically with the patterns in the autonomic nervous system down in the body, let's just say, and we have patterns in the body: heartbeat patterns, breathing patterns, muscle tension patterns, blood flow patterns, and emotional patterns, right? Hormonal patterns, right? So if you look at our experience as nothing more than patterns persisting, it makes it much easier rather than reality I'm trying to change. If I'm trying to change my reality by the way, my brain and body is telling me what reality is, it's not, it's just a pattern that looks for reality to confirm itself. So it goes, I told you I know what reality is. Then I'm in trouble. I'm trying to fight reality. And then, as someone mentioned earlier, how do I know I'm just lying to myself when I do this? Because your brain wants to tell you what reality is. But the brain's an organ, the heart's an organ, the liver's an organ. Would you listen to it to tell you what reality is? It's a pattern recognition device. It's patterns persisting, right? And so it's got patterns happening that we start to believe is reality. Why? Because it remembers something from yesterday. And it said, well, I know that happened, so don't tell me it didn't. But it deleted all the other things that happened yesterday. Fair enough. So it's not remembering a pattern of yesterday when I was looking, when there was a bird maybe at 5 feet from me. I deleted that. I'm deleting things all the time. If you followed someone around with a camera, you'd ask them, tell me about yesterday. They'll tell you a slice of it, and you can show them 10,000 different things that weren't part of their yesterday. So yesterday is not their truth. Their truth is what their brain is patterning that is referred to as a yesterday experience. And even that's a pattern, thinking that this is placed in a way that I call happened before, right? Then we have present patterns, right? Where the brain is looking to support, yeah, there it is. And yet, what's interesting is you can't really experience something out there unless it's inside first. So if you see something out there, you are actually the pattern inside to see it. So what do you mean? I have experiences as a child. No, when we first have these experiences, it's just data flow, sounds and colors, and right. We start carving out the patterns and giving them meaning and then projecting them and remembering them and then reacting to them. So when we see it out there, our brain goes, there it is, and there it is, and there it is, and there it is. And it keeps looking for its own pattern to support its existence. One might call that the ego. It's a continuity of my past and look my present, and it starts projecting patterns into the future. So when it sees it again, it goes, see, I knew about my future because I was thinking about it yesterday, and it's there again, and I'm proving it. Meanwhile, again, I've deleted everything else that's happening. And that's why it feels so real, because we're seeing it in the world. Don't tell me my bank account isn't like that. Like, I'm seeing it. Is the brain is only looking for that pattern. It's not even interested in finding another pattern. So even if it was there, you'd either wouldn't notice it or you'd be worried about the old pattern coming back because we're addicted to the problem of the old pattern. Okay? So these are patterns persisting, and they just run and run and run. What we want to do is first recognize that there are patterns of brain activity and body activity and nothing more. They're not real. They're patterns. They will find anything real in the world if they persist. Example, I have a pattern of a skyscraper where skyscrapers don't exist, or an airplane where airplanes don't exist. It will keep going until that airplane is created and it flies. And as one Wright brother said to the other, don't worry about this crash. I've already experienced the perfect landing and perfect takeoff. It's just a matter of time. So the pattern inside was real. It was just waiting until it found the pattern outside through creativity, through happenstance, through noticing it, through confirmation bias or attention bias. It's trying to find the pattern that already exists, right? So these are our patterns, and we call this our experience. We respond to it, and then we have a pattern on top of it, trying to change it. Try to read a book, maybe that will change it. I'll go to this workshop, maybe that will change it. I'll breathe, I'll meditate out of the pattern, maybe it'll change. But we're not addressing the actual pattern. We're not in the pattern. We're not processing the pattern to change the pattern. We're just responding to the pattern. And this is why I believe personally why change is so difficult or seems so difficult, is because we're trying to react to a pattern rather than do something else with it to change the pattern. And how do you change a pattern? You change the pattern by becoming aware of something fully in brain and body in the face of the existing pattern that's telling you what reality is. I'll get into that now. If you look at these patterns as kind of addictive habitual pattern behaviors, and you look at the brain as these, let's just say, these synapses that are really close together and firing automatically because there's no effort, right? When you do something over and over again, it becomes easier and easier, and it's called unconscious behavior because there's no effort, right? And so now I can do it unconsciously. It's happening out of my awareness. It's happening so fast, and these are the synapses in the brain that we call pictures of our experience. And these are the feelings in the body we call our experience of the experience, a visceral experience of it. And if you look at the cells, right, and you look at the receptors on the cells, they're opening to receive something. So let's look how that works. If we take in a lot of sugar, for example, the body's blood, the glucose levels increase in the body, right? If the glucose levels increase in the body, insulin is released to deal with the sugar. Wow, we have a lot of sugar, but we need to store the sugar. Well, there's not enough insulin receptors in the cells to take that sugar and turn it into glucose, right? Into storage, into the cells. So more receptors need to open, So this can happen. So now these receptors are opening, and now we need more each time. We start to get sensitive to it, and we keep going. We start to desensitize ourselves to it, and we need more and more and more until we have insulin resistance, and our body can't even create it. So we actually have to put insulin in the body in order to make this happen. And then the insulin can store more of that sugar, and it's basically addicted to that sugar, right? And so we need more, and then we need more insulin, but we don't have enough insulin to deal with the sugar. So we start becoming insulin resistant and desensitized to it. So we need more each time. Just like dopamine in the brain, and just like other things, that the more you use, the more you flood it, the more you're going to need to keep baseline. So now this is just theory, but there's some truth to this. I just forget the research. This woman who's a pharmacologist wrote a book on how emotions are made, and the molecule of emotion, or I forget the other book, but it's basically saying that the receptors in the cells do that. But again, this is more of a theory because I don't remember the book. It was a couple years back. But basically, it's saying the same thing, that if your cells are constantly being inundated with cortisol and stress hormones, right, or certain patterns of chemistry, they're going to need to deal with that, and they're going to create more receptors to deal with that. And so they start to become addicted to these patterns. So the brain is addicted to the mental pattern of the experience, and the body is addicted to the emotional pattern. And so as soon as we are comfortable and present, guess what happens to the body? It needs its fix. All these receptors with no cortisol, no fear, no adrenaline, or not enough adrenaline to fill up the receptors. Again, this is a metaphor for any of your scientists out there, but there's some truth in this that I can't get into because it's not a class on that. It's more of a metaphor for habitual behavior. So these receptors open, and they're going, where's the fear? We need fear because we have all these receptors that are dealing with this. We need to take in fear. And suddenly it will trigger a thought of a past or future possibility. The body will create cortisol and adrenaline and cortisol and other stress hormones, and it will satisfy itself. And so the fear will trigger thought, and the thought will trigger the fear, and it's this symbiotic relationship that creates this recursive loop, and they start to build and build and build, and nothing has happened other than something inside of us, a pattern persisting. If we get calm and we disengage from it, it will start to look for it out there as proof. Like, don't get too comfortable. If not, it will unconsciously try to create the situation and go, there it is, I told you, because we're addicted to the pattern, or the cells are addicted to the pattern, the brain's addicted to the pattern, and we don't realize that's happening. Once we realize that's happening, it becomes much easier to break. So that's the first thing we have to recognize, is if we see it as a pattern of patterns persisting, needing more, and every time we allow it to happen by either fighting it, believe it or not, or giving in to it, we are activating the pattern because we're putting our attention on it. We're making the pattern important, and that's how it stays alive, through importance, value. That's why there's that whole idea, lose it, use it or lose it. It happens in the brain, it happens in the body. So when something's important, the body and brain is going to create more of it, whether it's important because we're resisting it, afraid of it, scared of it, fighting it, or obsessed with it, or enveloped in it. So it starts to create this pattern, right? And then we say, oh, I have to not have these feelings or thoughts. It's ridiculous. What we want to do is first recognize that all we're doing is experiencing not reality, but a pattern that wants to find reality, remember reality, look for reality based on its own patterns and emotional content. And that's the first thing we need to do, is recognize that this is a pattern running. And the reason the pattern got stuck first and foremost, especially if it's a negative pattern, is because we tensed our muscles, we resisted the experience, And we then ran out of the body into another pattern called rumination, perseveration, worry, or complaining, or coping, or a certain type of behavior, even success behavior. That's, an attempt to run away from the sensations in the body that the body is continuing to repattern over and over again and persist. So, what we want to do is so bloody difficult because as soon as you do it, the brain is going to think you're out of your mind because it knows the truth. It knows what's safe, what's not safe. And what you're going to do is be putting your attention on something with all five senses and having a new experience, which is in a sense what hypnosis is, absorption of something fully into your being, or a suggestive idea accepted into your being at the exclusion of everything else. So nothing else exists, right? So what you're basically asking yourself to do, especially if there's trauma behind it, it's really intense, is you're asking yourself that to be in a jungle, right? To be in a jungle where there's a tiger staring at you and a snake kind of getting closer, and you're being asked to just look at this weave, this basket that you weave. Just look at the weave and weave the basket and pay no attention to any of that or the fight flight in your nervous system. Just be absorbed in the basket. Who can do that? This is what it feels like, and this is why we don't do it, because the warnings are saying, how dare you? This pattern was a pattern of not only not being safe, but a pattern to be safe from what we're trying to avoid. How dare you be comfortable and have a new experience when you haven't dealt with this experience of the tigers and the snake, and you haven't really addressed it? What's called closure. You haven't closed the loop. So how could you possibly be in the mood of the wish fulfilled? And if there are snakes and tigers, and the answer is you really can't unless you see it for what it is: patterns, brain chemistry patterns, heartbeat patterns, breathing patterns. And you're seeing it as just that, not tigers, not reality, but just that, a pattern, a fear pattern, shame pattern, worry pattern, whatever. And in the face of that, and only in the face of that, you give yourself permission to be enveloped in the pattern of what you would like while doing that. As soon as you do that, the other pattern is going to get louder. And then the voice of the pattern thinking it's reality is going to get louder, saying, what if this doesn't happen? Or you can't do this, or that's not going to change anything. And the way to deal with that is first with the thoughts, you say, I'm not trying to change anything. You don't exist. You're a pattern. I respect that. And I'm not trying to change anything. I'm just noticing one pattern because you're another pattern. And I'm noticing a different pattern. That's all. As far as the body goes, as my body is feeling all this nervous energy, if I keep disengaging from it as energy trying to process, and at the same time, I'm feeling the chemistry of the pattern that I do like and would like to pattern, not want one day because I'm back to a pattern of time. I'm talking about the pattern in the eternal now of a pattern, thinking it's a future past, which is fine, but it's in the now. So I'm starting to notice a different pattern. I'm noticing different images and devaluing those images. I'm experiencing different chemistry and devaluing the other chemistry. But what's happening is my body is saying, how dare you do this? And it's not going to feel real. Why? Because if we go back to that model we were talking about, is this making sense, by the way, so far? No?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So let's look at this model I was getting at here. It really makes it so much easier. Okay. So let's say these are the synapses in the brain. They're sending information from one dendrite or whatever, I forget the terms. Don't tell my boss. Um, and these are, let's just say, your receptors. Again, this is a metaphor, but I believe this is exactly what's happening. And we have all these receptors, right? Looking for fear or whatever your pattern is, right? And they go, more, more, one by one. Yeah, 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 come on in. We'll create more for you, right? Now, when we are triggered, this is firing and this is firing. If we see it as an unresolved pattern, trying to just be accepted in life so we can discharge it and integrate it, providing there's really nothing we need to do in that moment. If there's something we need to do, we need to address it, obviously. But I'm talking about when these ideas, these habitual patterns that tell us who we are and what our life is and what we were come to the surface, and we see them as um, just firing patterns. In the face of it, and I'll give you a good metaphor or analogy in a minute. In the face of it, if you start to think a different image and just notice it, you see how close this is? These are firing right away. It's going to say, no, you can't do this. If I disengage and don't give this any attention by allowing it to be, not trying to fight it, that's the key, by disengaging, by accepting it as a pattern running, because that's what patterns do. Patterns persist. But I start noticing a new pattern. This pattern here is going to feel like nothing. It's going to feel like a hologram. At first it's going to feel like black and white. And this is going to double down and say, no, these images are our experience. This is like, I don't even know what this is. As a client once said, who was writing how he felt about being a voiceover actor for a living, was writing it, and he said, I feel like I'm lying to myself. I'm on the set today. I feel like I'm lying. Exactly, because you're firing stuff that you don't even have as an experience, and the stuff that you're patterned over and over again is so real, so alive, and so full with energy and color, and that this feels exactly like that. And our job is to continue to focus and experience this while this is firing. And again, I'll give you a good analogy in a moment. And while this cell has got a tiny little chemical pattern of oxytocin or serotonin, some pleasure, some endogenous endorphins for a feeling of receiving, right? These are going to be like, what are you doing? And if you just let this come and go by breathing, releasing tension, devaluing it, and seeing it as passing, and at the same time, this is key, it's a dialectic experience. There are two things that are opposing at the same time happening, right? And here you start to just feel this while devaluing, accepting, and letting this flow over here. The body starts going, what's he paying attention to over here? And these start to open. And there's going to be a critical point where this is going to fight for its life over here. And this is going to fight for its life. But if you stay here in the face of this, we're not talking about dealing with your world. You deal with your world. We're talking about your inner world. If you stay here at the face of it, this will then hit critical mass, and this will be automated, and this one will be far away. This one now will be less, use it or lose it, and this will be closer. And then these receptors will get bigger, and these will start to shrink because there's not enough cortisol, adrenaline, to keep them going. So they have to start to go to sleep because you're waking up these guys, and they want more, because patterns persist. So here's the perfect analogy for this. So you really get what you need to do while that pattern is firing. It's not easy, but if you see it as a pattern and you really understand what you're doing and why, and you realize there's nothing else to do, and you reframe the patterns as nothing more than story that is not yours. It belongs to your parents, school, teachers, colleagues, siblings, friends, peers, movies, TV, and all of it is not your story, so you don't pay attention to anything that's not your story. And usually those stories with them have a lot of emotional content as well as thoughts and images. So you have to also do the same thing with the emotions as you're doing with the mental content. It's not your story. You're not interested in it. You're not letting the brain dictate your experience. You're dictating your experience, and the brain and body starts to pattern that rather than you being imprisoned by its pattern. So the servant is no longer the master. So the master is the one that focuses, and the servant listens to us rather than us be wrapped up into it that was supposed to be a servant. Now it's the master. The servant has become the master. Okay, so am I talking too fast? Or are you with me? All right, so, okay, you got it. All right, great. So, what's the best analogy I can come up with? It's such a perfect analogy because it's as real in the world as it is an analogy in your mind. So, you want to liken your nervous system, these patterns, these intense emotional patterns and thought forms. You have to liken them, your nervous system, to a child. To a child. Now, if you had a child and they got connected and in love with a toy, it became their friend, associate, it's an extension of their love, their happiness, their fun. It became their buddy. They go to sleep with it, they play with it, and then you find out, hopefully you're not giving your son a candle or daughter, so you know what I mean. But then you find out that this toy is filled with lead. Lead everywhere. It's leaking, it's leaching out of it, it's everywhere. Right? You're going to take this toy away from the child, yes? This is us trying to not think and not be subject to the pattern. Because you take that toy away from the child, those receptors are going to scream for that pattern, yes? And you put this in a safe and you say you can't play with that. Is that child going to take this toy, this new pattern? It's going to scream bloody murder. That child is going to yell at you, throw a fit, threaten you, negotiate with you, manipulate you, even annoy you to such a degree that maybe you'll hit that child and you'll feel so bad you'll give that child that toy back. That's what the child is looking for. It does not want the change. You all with me? It does not want this to happen, and it's not going to accept it as long as there's an option to keep the pattern going, which is toy back. Especially if it learned that if I keep going, I'm going to get that toy back. Fair enough? So it's going to keep going, and it's very sensitive to how I'm feeling about the discomfort. If that child knows there's an option, and it knows I'm uncomfortable, it knows that it's going to get me to give it what it wants because it's going to make me uncomfortable, and I want comfort, not discomfort. Yes? And if it knows that comfort is more important than what I'm doing, it's going to win. Yes? It will scream and yell, and I'll finally go, take this. Just don't tell anybody. Just play with it for 5 minutes. Wear gloves. And if I get relaxed because I didn't change, then the brain goes, oh, we're never going to change. We're going to double down next time on this pattern. No matter how much you think you're in charge, we're in charge. Because as long as you relax because the pattern completes itself, it's going to always want to complete itself because patterns persist. To use the earlier example, oh, say, can you see? If every time you said that in your head, you stopped and imprinted with oh, say, can you dog? Oh, say, can you dog? And every time you said it, you saw a dog. Every time you said it, you heard dog echo in your ear. Dog, dog, dog. Oh, say, can you dog? You associated, oh, say, can you, my dog, right? And you just kept doing that. After about 20 times, that pattern would start to persist, yes? Because you're breaking the pattern while in the pattern. And suddenly, oh, say, can you dog? Oh, my goodness. I forgot. How'd it go again? Oh, say, can you see, right? That pattern will persist. Well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have a whole different pattern around what we're doing and replace it. And that child, that nervous system, is going to be firing, warning us, screaming. The good news is if you see it as nothing more than a pattern, and you expect it to be uncomfortable because it's starting to starve and it can't get its toy. And you see that child, if you take that lighter and you put it in the safe and you relax around the child screaming, you like that they're screaming because you know that they're learning to accept something that is not an option. But here's the key, here's the new pattern. Don't forget the new pattern. If while that child is screaming and you relax, and while you're relaxing, you're not going, here, play with this toy, you're back to the pattern, right? You're in the child pattern trying to change the pattern. But if you disengage from the child and you ignore it and devalue it and reframe it as just a pattern persisting, dying, and while that's doing its job and you're not trying to get rid of the pattern, you welcome it, you want it to run its course without completing itself. If while that's happening, you start doing this, you don't want, okay, I'm going to play with this. Looks like a hook. What does that child do? If you're really at first it's like, I don't want it, and then you just go, it's okay. And you're enjoying it. You're absorbed in a new pattern while the kid is screaming, while your nervous system is going crazy. And you go deeper into this. That child will know at one point, because it's an efficiency machine, the child and the nervous system. It's going to know that it's going to take more energy to get that toy back than it's worth it, because it's not going to get the toy back. So then, since it seeks new patterns and stimulation, it's going to go, what do you got over here? And then you're like, oh, nothing. I was just, you want to play with it? You don't have to. And then all of a sudden the child goes, oh, what do you got? As soon as that happens, this pattern now is going to start to persist. Especially if the old pattern is not an option. It will persist. And that child will be playing with this as its best friend for weeks to come and months to come. That's exactly how it works. It's like exactly how it works. You become aware this represents only one pattern where your brain's like, well, how's that going to happen? The other pattern's not happening other than your brain. Might as well have this pattern happening. We're not talking about the world. Tell the brain, we're not talking about the world. The world will do the world. Actions fix the world. Behaviors fix the world. A juxtaposition of what I would like and what is, and that juxtaposition creates insight and behavior to fix the world. I'm not talking about the world, brain, but I'm talking about patterns that live in my mind and body I call the world. How's that? And I'll leave you alone and go, oh, I guess so, all right. And so what we want to do is respect the pattern, and in the face of it, just start one little pattern. And don't judge it, you're just starting a pattern. So let me give you an example of what I just did. And I realized how deep this well goes, this rabbit hole goes. So I got sick about 2 weeks ago. I had the flu, and it was kind of, whatever it was, 3 weeks ago. But then I had a cough, a lingering cough. And because of that, I haven't exercised, and I was going to jiu-jitsu, I was doing all this stuff, and now I haven't exercised. And I realized I'm not even doing push-ups. And it hit me, I went, patterns persist. So why do I think I'm all of a sudden going to do push-ups tomorrow, right? It would make me think, when patterns persist, why? So, well, I've done push-ups in the past when I haven't done push-ups. Why? Because patterns persist. I will not do push-ups until I get to the place where it threatens either basically my vanity, and then I'll go, oh, I'm in a shape, I'm going to do push-ups. Well, that's part of the pattern persisting. It has nothing to do with me. I think I'm making a decision, but that's another pattern, right? That happens when that pattern reaches a certain pattern. Then I go, oh, and then a new pattern persists. So I said, rather than being a pattern recognition device and a pattern persisting, I'm going to notice and experience new things in the face of this pattern. And what was this pattern? I don't want to do push-up pattern, or I'm not doing push-up pattern. So all I did was go to my kitchen island. I didn't even do a full push-up on the floor because I had bad shoulders and I was going to hurt, but I wanted to break the pattern. And all I did was just go like this once on an angle as if I was doing a push-up on my island. And I did a push-up, checking out my shoulders, not so bad. I did another one. And I relaxed into a little bit and did another one. And I realized right there I'm actually engaged in an experience that if I keep engaging in that on that level that will start to persist if I continue, and then it will increase in intensity, because what other patterns persist? Whenever you do something and it's comfortable, you can't help but like to just challenge yourself just a little bit. So that pattern will persist. And sure enough, it did. I was on the floor. I said, oh, let me just try a real push-up. And I did push my shoulders, and I just relaxed into it. And I was just like, oh, let's do one more. Oh, let me do one more. And then that pattern of wanting to challenge more, since it was effortless, started to persist. And now, even as I'm talking right now, I'm craving a push-up because that pattern's wanting to say, oh, say, can you? My brain is like, oh, I want to continue. I do a push-up every day or push-ups every day, and I want to now continue that pattern. Not out of force, because that's a different pattern. This is a pattern that I'm just interrupting. This is how patterns persist, and this is how we break them. We have to experience something new in the face of the pattern. In NLP, we call different terms collapsing an anchor. You're feeling one emotion, another emotion kicks in, or a swish pattern. One pattern triggers another pattern before it triggers the end of that pattern. There are many different ways to put it. But it's really understanding that while something's happening, if we notice something else and we stop the pattern of judgment around the progress, because that's another pattern, and we just start enjoying noticing an existing pattern, and while doing that, going deeper into the desired pattern, which is just a pattern, you start to be in charge of your life. And here's the last part of this that really helped. If you look at all the uncomfortable negative structural tension patterns of craving and all this stuff, you'll realize that with it, in the emotional pattern, in the thought pattern, and imagery pattern, it's basically someone else's idea or story we came up with to keep the pattern going. And the real us is this invisible, if you will, consciousness that can put its awareness on anything like that while the pattern's persisting. The only thing we are really is that, and have the ability to do, is change our focus, what we focus on, how we focus, what we resist, and what we allow and receive and mindfully experience, right? That's it. So if you just take responsibility for that, that will start to change patterns by releasing tension, slowing down the breathing, not falling into getting rid of the emotion, being swept up in the emotion, judging the emotion, but by seeing it as a pattern firing while you're feeding your receptors a different pattern, and knowing that it's not going to feel like anything, but as long as you put your awareness on it while disengaging from the other and still allowing more and more rather than looking for a result, which is another pattern, this will become your pattern. And as soon as you do that, you say to yourself, anything that's not my choice, meaning the image I want, the feeling I want, anything, and I mean any thought, emotion that is not what I put my awareness on, is nothing more than a story that is not mine and was never mine and none of my business. It belonged to my parents, my siblings, my peers, the teachers, TV, movies, programming. It wasn't me, never was, and I'm not interested in any programming other than my choice to put my awareness on my free will to choose what I experience in my awareness and let everything else that is not that just move through me because it's not my story. Just like you would thinking about a river in Colorado somewhere that may have, level 5 rapids that you're not paying attention to now. And it's chaotic and it's crazy. It's not yours. It's not your story, is it? You just go along your life. You're not thinking about the river, and you're not thinking about intense birds flying over your head if you're walking over to a beautiful tree. It's not your story. If you see all thoughts, and I mean all thoughts, all emotions, like the child screaming, that's not my story. None of it is. Not the guilt that I'm not giving back the child the toy. None of it is my story. Now that's hard, or it's weird, or this is difficult, or I'm afraid of this, or how do I, that's still more story. It's all story. And the only thing that's not your story is you. And you're a free will consciousness that can put its attention on anything it wants and experience that fully at the exclusion of everything else that is not your story. So you become the story maker by your attention and your focus. Isn't that cool? You just say, it's not mine. It was my mom's, my dad's, it's fear, it's not mine. And every time you do that, you go deeper into your experience. And I'll leave you with this before we do meditation. You give, this is a wonderful trigger, you give yourself the suggestion that any thought, any image, any firing that's just patterns, that is not my decision, what I'm experiencing, any one of them that show up and get my attention is a trigger to take me deeper into my experience and my story. The more that kid screams, it makes me relax and play with this even more. That screaming takes me deeper into the joy of this toy. The louder it gets, the more I go into this toy. Great. The less it's not my concern or story, because I can't do anything about it, so it's not my story or my concern. This is it. And at one point, you'll hit critical mass, where this pattern becomes the real pattern, and the other pattern is not the pattern. Make sense? So what pattern do we put our attention on? Well, probably the best pattern is always the opposite of the pattern that's your story. So if the story is, I'm alone, put your attention on a pattern of someone kissing your face off and adoring you. Yeah, like literally feel those receptors opening, that their patterns opening, while you disengage from all the other patterns called not lovable. That's my story. This is my story, what I'm enjoying right now. If it's money, same thing. I don't have that. Great. I'm going to see all that as a pattern. And in my own pattern, I'm going to feel and see what it feels like. Have money in the bank, be making money. For whatever reason, I'm there now, and I'm patterning that as my internal pattern. Does that mean I don't have to do things in the world? No, but the world is the world. We know how to do things in the world. We can't do things in the world because we're too busy seeing the world through this pattern. That's why we're not in an intentional state, which this puts you into. This puts us into an intentional state so we can now juxtapose what we do like with the world, and that creates its own energy to want to create it. But we can't get there if we're watching the world through those old stories rather than watching the world through its juxtaposition of what we would like, with its juxtaposition of what we would like and what is, and staying there and seeing everything as story until life matches me. Because I'm no longer paying attention to any of the story. And something will switch, something will trigger. And you might even have a lot of energy coming up because you have to let go of something that stopped you from the receptors falling in love with this pattern called hurt, sadness, fear. They're going to have to come up and go as you make more room for this pattern. Fair enough? All right. So let's go into a little meditation about this. Think about your present situation as a story. Good. I'm getting nice and wow, so you guys are getting it. Cool. All right. Mm-hmm. So we have to go into trance. We just have to experience ourselves as pattern recognition devices first. Okay? So first thing I want you to do is just recognize that you're a body in a chair breathing, and there are patterns that are persisting in your mind as thoughts called your life, past, present, future. And those are triggering those receptors around emotions in your body, opening to fear, anxiousness, desire, craving, shame, hurt, what ifs. And then self-talk, what about this, what about... But just see it as a pattern running and continue to see it as nothing more than patterns persisting that has nothing to do with you, like a washing machine going and you're not paying attention to it. Thoughts, emotions, data. If you're holding your breath, if you're tensing your muscles, you're not letting that child scream. You're saying, oh, okay, I'll give you back your old pattern. But if you're letting it scream, you're not interested in it, you're no longer interested in that story, no longer interested in judging the story, trying to fix the story, trying to get better so you don't have the story, trying to fight the story, trying to stop the emotions of it. You're no longer interested. That's what children do. That's what stories do. They just come and go and they scream their heads off. Let the breathing slow down, because by being comfortable, that child will now listen to you rather than you being enslaved by it. Good, even more now. And now, as that's firing, and you welcome its right to fire, and it has patterns, I want you to just notice a different pattern that's eternal as well. That's the opposite of this. So it's a pattern, has a different image, and a different sensation. It's the sensation of receiving. And notice as you're doing that, the images are maybe holographic and the emotions are not very strong of receiving because the other patterns, the kid is screaming in your nervous system, trying to get you. Good, let it scream and then go deeper. Just keep letting go of tension and start baking, basking, being enveloped in this pattern for no other reason. You're choosing that you're the pattern consciousness and everything else is a story that's not yours. This is yours, your choice. Receive it even more. Just experiencing that. Really experiencing that. Keep disengaging from the other, letting it run amok. Notice the synapses are starting to get looser already because you're devaluing them. You're more interested in feeling this than that. And this is becoming your past, present, future. It's just a pattern of data. There's no such thing. So if the other one wants to be a pattern of data called the past, present, future, let this one be your past, present, future. And as you breathe, allow it to become more compelling, more brighter. Allow the receptors in your cells, literally feel them opening to feel the having feeling of gratitude, appreciation, of connection, of love, of abundance, of relaxation, of freedom, while the other stuff is fighting for its life because it wants your attention, but you're paying attention to this, so it's got to listen to you. You got to listen to it. Let the child scream and yell. It's starting to get the message that you don't care about it, you care about this, and receive even more. Just experiencing only that. And keep noticing how you're letting it in your mind and body with each breath. And notice that everything that's not this is a story. Are you interested in the story or this? Are you interested in worrying and trying to control the story, or are you interested in receiving this? Good. You might feel a release of something to make more room for these receptors in your cells and this image in your mind. And keep imprinting this because it's just a better pattern than judging that. You're not mad at that. You just love this. And the sensations you're feeling is everything changing so you can become this. So you're not interested in the story so the life can become you. This is your story, not anything else. Take another breath. Go deeper. Now, I'm wondering if you can allow the days and weeks, and even after you're done with this, I'm wondering if you can allow any time, any thought, any image triggers a stress response or discomfort. You see it. It's a trigger to trigger you to release that story and to go deeper, so deep into receiving that it's almost like you live in an invisible world and you love that because you can stay here while everything else, those stories come and go. They're not yours. You can either love this or hold on to those stories and pay attention to them and be led by them and be consumed by them. Or you can be consumed by this. Even more. Each time you do this, this becomes more comfortable and everything else becomes less interesting, more devalued, and this becomes more valued. Now really feel the receptors in your cells changing. One group of receptors are falling asleep and getting shrinking, and the other group is increasing and allowing more in of this feeling. So much so you don't mind the other. You're too busy loving this. You're not getting rid of the other. You're just loving this. And the same with your synapses in your brain. I want you to imagine the synapses of the old patterns are becoming a little softer and further away and maybe not firing as fast. And notice that these are firing a little faster and they're growing closer and closer. Take a breath and get a sense that this is kind of your familiar past, present, future, and everything else is unimportant. In any moment in the world, any moment at all, is a trigger to take you deeper into this. This is your reality. This is all you have. You might as well live here and let go of every story that is not this. So this can create itself through impulses, behaviors, happenstance, ideas, motivation. Let it do all the work. The subconscious does all the work. You gotta be open to it. You gotta be present to it. You gotta stay in this state while you do it and not be in any other story, because then it gets confused. What are we doing? This story of the past or this story? You have to let everything be a trigger to go into this. Take a deep breath. And coming back to now, this pattern starts to persist. Every time you choose it, it persists. Every time you choose it, it persists. Every time you choose it, it starts choosing itself, especially if nothing else is happening but this, because everything else is devalued.